talking about these cornerstones. There are 3 cornerstones to God. No more and no less. 3 cornerstones. Now you see them on the front of your bulletin. That's not actually a picture of the cornerstones as God has them. But omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. And notice the form of the word. Most of the time, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent is what most of us learned at some point in time. And that's not correct. Omniscient means all-knowing. Omniscience is all knowledge. Do you hear the difference? And I like to say that it's not only the knower, but the knowledge that it knows. Omnipotent, all-powerful. God is not powerful. God is power. It's not filled with power that comes from someplace else. When you have a jar of jelly and it's full, you say a jelly jar full or a jar full of jelly. God is not something that gets filled. It is the source of all. So it is the power and the one that has it. Omnipresent at all points. And we like to say at all points equally present. That there's no place you can go in this universe where the power of God is not. No. These 3 cornerstones, they can become the cornerstones of your life. Cornerstones that support your life. The foundation upon which you build a positive and powerful life based on your awareness of the presence of God in you, expressed in you and through you. Most people have heard of these 3 terms, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, but I don't think that we think much about them, do we? I can't remember that I've spent a lot of time in my life thinking, oh, omnipresence. Yes. How does that relate to me? Does it? Yes, it does. Omnipotence. Does it? Yes, it relates to you. Omniscience. Yes, it relates to all of us. How's that possible? You are the image likeness of God. The image likeness of God. God has these 3 cornerstones. Then you have these 3 cornerstones. Does that make sense to you? They are your foundation as well. And it works through what? God individualized in you, and we call that the Christ. Thank you. 1 star. Next time. It'll be your star. Christ individualized in you. Now, I don't know that I've said this before, but I think I should. God individualized is individualized in man. God is not individualized in a rock. Rock is an idea of God and a manifestation God created. But God is not individualized in that rock. Does that make sense? Individualized in Christ in you, which is how these cornerstones work in you and through you. God, 3 cornerstones, Christ in you, the image likeness of God, God implanted with you, in you. That's how God works through you, is through that spirit that is within you. And through these 3 cornerstones. Now, in order to become really aware of these cornerstones and how they function in our lives, last week I used the term generator, that we have an internal generator, and whatever we feed that generator is kind of what we experience in our lives, and we feed it thoughts of depression, we feed it thoughts of anger, and it generates these things for us very well. But then I said, you have a better one inside, and that's that individualized Spirit of God. And we want to start using that to generate our lives, to generate the good in our lives. And what it takes is to dwell on these cornerstones. Do we know how to dwell on something? You bet your bippy we do. I can remember a particular situation. I used to sit in an office out at Unity and talk to a friend of mine in one of the offices. And about once a month, I'd sit there and I'd dwell on some negative aspect. I had a counseling appointment with Martha. And I'd sit there and I'd tell this person how I was seething about it. Somebody says to you, you feel okay? You're looking a little peaked. You been all right? Everything's okay? Do you need a checkup? What do you start doing? Start trying to figure out, is something wrong? And believe me, you'll find what you look for. Because you dwell upon it. What are you going to dwell upon? No, I'm whole and well. That's all I'm going to think about is being whole and well. No, you're going to think, there must be something wrong. Well, I get to find what's wrong. And pretty soon, you do. Because of dwelling on it. I have dwelled on other things. And you've seen several of them here. That piano is one. What did I do? I held that piano in mind. I actually had a picture of it on my kitchen wall. And lo and behold, something that wasn't for sale not only became for sale, but they sold it to me. And that's pretty good, considering Van Cliburn wanted to buy it. I didn't tell him I beat him out of it when I met him, but maybe I should have. Yeah. I dwelled upon the house I bought. I dwelled upon this place. I found it wouldn't let me go. I dreamed about this place before I ever was in it. We can dwell on things in a good way, in a creative way. And that's what we need to do, is start dwelling on these three cornerstones. But we're experts at dwelling on the negative. You start to think about what's wrong, and then you find something wrong. Last week I talked about such things as sadness, resentment, depression, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of failure. And they all come about as a result of dwelling on some thought, some concept within ourselves that's what we are. Or of some negativity. And we dwell on it, and then we feel it and experience it. It's sort of the twisting of the idea of dwelling instead of on the positive, on the negative. When we dwell on things out here, we get more of what's out here. And you may see those results in your life, and we call them what? Grief, resistance, irritation, anger, loneliness, futility. Probably you can think of a few more that, in the body, when we dwell on something in the negative, then it becomes rather obvious because we'll find that pain. We'll find that problem. We'll make that problem. So I'm going to begin now to ask you to dwell on something from within yourself instead of something outside yourself. Not an appearance, not a sensation of sadness or grief or frustration, but dwell on a truth about yourself and dwell on these 3 cornerstones. Question is it more difficult to dwell on these 3 cornerstones? Because you're going to say, well, they're abstract. They're invisible. Yeah. But you've dwelled on something invisible before. Nobody did anything to you. And you believe they did. What they did was invisible because it really didn't happen yet, but then it seems to happen because you dwelled on it. It's not any more difficult to dwell on these concepts instead of the other things, the negativities. So we're going to begin to dwell upon God. And it's funny how sometimes when we start to think about dwelling on God or thinking about God or digging down deep to touch that center within us, we tense up. You've seen those preachers on television? They start praying and there was one, I think his name was Tilton. He was, I think, from Texas. I don't see him anymore, but I used to see him on television and I used to think, you're going to hurt yourself. And all he was doing was praying. I mean, yes, that's a powerful thing, but I want you to dwell on God and dwell on these cornerstones and enjoy it. Be relaxed. Have a good time. Omniscience, Omnipresence, and Omnipotence. The 3 cornerstones of God, but the 3 cornerstones of you and your life too. Now, we've all been taught, all of us here have been taught to look beyond the outer, to look higher, to look to a higher aspect, to look at God individualized in us for our healing, for the change in our human relationships, for the change in our prosperity, to look to God. And we do that by looking to that inner self, that Christ within us, and then expect to reap the reward. When we do that, when we can rely on that, and relax into that, and realize that that generator is there to generate good in our lives, we can begin to create a whole new experience for ourselves. So let's look at each of these. The first one that I want to talk about is omniscience. We've heard before that God is all-knowing. Well, God is so much more than that, because God is not filled with knowledge. God is the knowledge. There's a difference between being the knowledge and having the knowledge. You know? Being the knowledge, you don't have to study. It's there. It's innate within you because it is you. It is a part of you, an integral part of you. From God, all true knowledge comes. God, therefore, knows everything about you. And I thought I had to tell him everything about me. I thought there were all kinds of secrets I was keeping from God. And to know all also is to forgive all. Remember God walking through the garden? And he gave Adam some instructions. Adam, there's a tree over there. It's got fruit on it. Don't eat it. Don't touch it. Don't even think about touching it, okay? Sure, boss. What did God know? Of course. What happens when you tell your children things like that? You know they're going to do it. Of course they're going to do it. God knew. It was a step in man's evolution. Some people think of the fall from the Garden of Eden as a fall down, but isn't it a fall up from invisibility, something in the mind of God, to something in expression, in manifestation, clothed with skin, instead of being simply an invisible idea? That's a step in our evolution as spiritual beings. God knows everything about the universe. There's going to be no new scientific discoveries that God doesn't already know. It's all there. God knew it in the beginning. And you thought television was something new in your lifetime. Did you ever waste time in prayer, tipping God off about some situation and how to take care of it? God, there's something going on, and this is what you need to do, Lord. Lord, I need this and this and this, and this is how I want you to do it. Lord, this is the right way. We tell God how to do things all the time. Omniscience. It knows. So we can stop that right now. We need to think about this cornerstone. Omniscience. What does it mean that God knows everything? There's nothing I need to tell God. I only need to listen to God. To tell God is simply to get it off my chest and be an actual act of me turning something over to God, getting a sense of I've given it to God. But that's all we have to do, is release it. The concerns, release it to God, because God already knows. And it is for us to get our hands off of it. So, begin to think this week how omniscience works in your life. Oh, and it even expands beyond that, because remember I said, it's in you. Omniscience can be in you as well, because the Christ is God individualized. Therefore, that cornerstone is a part of Christ in you. And we spend so much time saying, I don't know. I don't know. Can you tell me what to do? Can you tell me what the answer to this is? Can you tell me how to handle this situation? When we turn to that higher level of ourselves, of God individualized inside, and say, show me, we're looking to that omniscience of Christ in us. That is your direct link to God mind, to all the wisdom and knowledge that God is. Ask inside. Ask believing that you get an answer. Ask believing that the knowledge is there. If you have frustration in your work or in your business, Maybe you feel like you're being held back by somebody, some situation. If you put it in a spiritual context and say, God knows, and God knows the answer, and through the Christ in me, I know the answer to this. So, Lord of my being, Christ in me, show me. Don't tell God how to fix anything, because it's already there. God is not only omniscience, but omnipotence. We've said God is the only power in the universe and in my life. God is the one and only power in the universe and in my life. You've heard something like that before, have you not? Do you believe it? Sometimes. There are other times where we're not so sure. Because every once in a while we see something that is maybe more powerful than God is. Maybe something God can't handle. Maybe something God doesn't know the answer for. One power, one source of all power. If God is the power, then what does that Spirit of God implanted within us, Christ in us, make us? Powerful. God is power. We are filled with that power. But like every plug-in outlet in your house, at the outlet is pure potential. You could whine and cry all evening and say, there's no energy in here to cook my dinner. Plug something in, turn something on. It's the same with that power. It's within you, but you need to connect to it. You need to plug into it. You need to turn to that higher power inside and realize God is power, and that power moves through me, and making me, Christ in me, powerful. I'm not a weakling. God, individualized in me, is power. It's amazing to realize that God doesn't have to arrange or rearrange anything in order to put something right in your life or in your body or in your mind. If there's any illness, God has the power to heal it. Because God is all power. Healing power. Remember the woman who sought Jesus out, the woman with the issue of blood? 12 years. She put up with it for 12 years, going from one doctor to another, each one telling her what a quack the one before was. Finally, she feels it in her bones, and I say that because as a woman it represents the feeling nature. She feels, if I can just touch that center of power, it will flow into and through me, and I will be healed. So she gets up close to Jesus. He doesn't even notice that she's that close to him. She touches the hem of his garment. Now, that's symbolic. They believed in that time and in that part of the world that the hem of the garment of a holy man had power. These are the fringes that would be at the four corners of a Jewish man's garment. He felt the power move. In the Bible it says, "Who touched me?" He felt that energy move. What's it about? When one of us feels the possibility of connecting to that power. And we take the step, reaching out, or should I say, reaching within to touch it. That's all we have to do is touch it. Remember, God knows everything. God is all knowledge. You don't have to tell God what you need, and you don't have to tell God how to fix it. God already knows that. You reach in and you touch that center of power, that socket that connects you to the power of God and the healing power of God. And she was made whole and well. She went to the one source for the healing. She went to the one source of the spiritual healing for her. And going to that source allowed that spiritual healing force to move in her and through you, through her, through you too. If we touch it, if we look. When we pray, when we turn to that center and we say, that Spirit of God within me is a healing spirit. A Spirit of God within me has the power to supply my every need. That Spirit of God within me has the power to make the crooked places in my life straight. When you pray and you speak such words, expect results. Because if we don't expect results, we've looked at the switch, we've reached out to touch it, but we never really touched it. We never flipped it. We never made the connection. Expect the results. And if you pray, if you affirm, and it doesn't come about immediately, what do? You do it again. You do it the next day. You do it again. But seeking to even more believe in that power. Believe in that Spirit individualized in you. And it works in you and through you. You don't go into prayer thinking, well, this probably won't work, but if I have to, I'll pray again. Go in expecting it to work every time. But if it doesn't, and sometimes there are reasons, good reasons, why it doesn't. And it usually means we're not ready to let go of something, to accept our good, not ready to give up some aspect in our lives. The third and last one is omnipresence. God at all points. And there was a discussion in our ministerial class. God at all points, equally present or not? We had an instructor who believed in the butter churn theory. If you think of the universe as a big butter churn, what happens in a butter churn? As you use the churn, you get more and more clumps of butter. In other words, there's more butter in this spot than there is in this spot. It starts to clump together. Martha Judici used to talk about the butter churn theory of I hold to God at all points, equally present. That means, we've been seeing things on television about the 50 years since the landing on the moon. Did you watch that 50 years ago? I did. It was mesmerizing. Do you believe we did it? I do. My uncle's father never believed it. He knew it was done in a studio somewhere. He just couldn't conceive that we did that. It's amazing the things that can be done. Do you realize how much had to be learned in order to do that? How much had to be developed? How many things that had to be brought from God mind, invisible, into visibility to make that happen? And they did it with computers that had less computing power than your telephone. They did it. Because somebody believed that power was available for us to accomplish, to do. One of the most remarkable things, I think, there are two things that I've enjoyed in my life, especially that were amazing to me. And one was the first time I looked through a telescope. That was when I was a Boy Scout. We took a field trip to the Cincinnati Observatory. We do have an observatory in Cincinnati. It's a telescope from the late 1800s. It's not gigantic, but it's in a nice domed building, and of course it's in a part of the city now that has too much light. But to look at the moon through that telescope was jaw-dropping, and then to see Saturn and the rings for a kid who was about 12. And then as I was traveling around the country, in high school, I was to the planetarium in Chicago, which was remarkable to see those planetarium shows and the expanse of the universe. I made it a habit when I was out traveling on the road, whatever city I was in, I would look for a planetarium. And I got to see the one in Toronto that's now gone. It was fantastic. And Montreal had one. I saw it there. And Winnipeg had one, and I saw it there. I would go wherever there was a planetarium to see that recreation of the universe on the ceiling. Fantastic. That's the kind of awe we should have in understanding the omniscience, the omnipotence, and the omnipresence of God and of Christ in us.